Hi everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing this gorgeous sample floral ribbon cincher made by the Court of the Emerald Queen, or just Emerald Queen Art as she's known on many of her social media accounts. Emerald Queen Art is a one-woman business run by Ursula from Poland. This video and this review was made possible only by my patrons on Patreon, so thank you so much. If it were not for you, I would not be able to afford to purchase these types of samples, and I would not be able to sort of pay it forward and support other independent corset makers within the community. So here's the front, the side, the back, and the other side. For the length and fit of this corset, the center front here is 10.5 inches high. At the princess seam, it's a little bit shorter. As you can see, the ribbons kind of converge and slant towards the side seam. So the princess seam is shorter at 8.5 inches. At the side seam, it's quite short at just under 8 inches. And in the center back here, it's 11 inches high. Although this is a sample and not all samples are the same size, the measurements were provided on Emerald Queen Art's listing, and I also measured this corset out of the box. So this is a size 24, and it is 24 inches closed waist. The top here accommodates a rib cage of 30 inches, so it has a 6-inch rib spring, and the bottom here accommodates a hip of 34.5 inches, so it's a 10.5 inch hip spring. The silhouette here is relatively conical through the ribs. It is a little bit of a U-shaped silhouette. This is just the nature of ribbon cinchers. But the unique factor of ribbon cinchers is that they are so much more lightly boned, and even the horizontal ribbons going across here, they can overlap and they can shift and be adjusted slightly. So I feel that ribbon cinchers are much more flexible. They provide a wider range of motion compared to, say, a traditional cincher with many panels going vertically and many bones going distributed across the entire torso. The fabric is also thinner and more lightweight, so when you put on a ribbon cincher, it tends to take to your body like almost immediately, I find. I think it creates a really beautiful curve. Ursula said that she had first taken a traditional 19th century ribbon cincher pattern, and then she adjusted the measurements to fit the more modern aesthetic in terms of its proportions. So let's go to the tabletop portion of this review, and I can show you the other details of this corset close-up. So here is the ribbon cincher laid flat, and for the materials you can very plainly see that the ribbon cincher is made from ribbon, and it is a gorgeous ribbon that's made from like a kind of pale gold base color with red and pink little floral motifs here, embroidery, and in the center part it's a little bit of an accordion texture, and this feels very interesting against my skin. I will admit that. If I'm wearing a liner between the corset and my skin, then I don't get these little accordion impressions left on my skin. But the strength parts of the ribbon cincher, you can see the underside of the ribbons right here. So I just need to be careful not to cut any of these threads, otherwise the embroidery itself would unravel. There are certain areas where they did use strength fabric. So this is a fine weave herringbone couture in a kind of light nude or a tan color. So they use this anywhere that needs reinforcement or they're holding bones, like the Modesty panel here is boned. Obviously the bones in the back and the grommets here, the bones on the side seams, and around the Busk area as well. And this is what the label looks like. It's sewn onto the Modesty panel, Court of the Emerald Queen, and it has her blog URL there. Talking about patterns with a ribbon cincher is a little bit tricky because they're kind of in a category all by themselves. You could consider it, you know, like as each one of these pieces as like a pattern piece, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, you know, 20 horizontal pieces and then 6 vertical pieces. Or you could think of it as, you know, this being one large, very curvy panel, this also being one very large, very curvy panel. So then you could consider it, say, a 5-panel pattern where these larger panels hold the majority of the curve, and the ribbons themselves were basically draped over to, you know, suit the curve. I have made ribbon corsets that way as well. So ribbon cinchers can be draped on a dress form or a pre-existing corset, but what Ursula said that she did was she took an antique ribbon cincher pattern and then she modified it to suit the modern aesthetic in terms of its curve and proportions. So if you see, if I kind of prop these up and then I try to stretch it out here, the shortest pieces are right at the waistline, and these pretty much function as the waist tape. There's no secondary waist tape in this corset. Most ribbon cinchers don't have a waist tape anyways. And then these other pieces are actually a little bit longer. And so this is what contributes to like a greater circumference as you get further away from the waistline. And so that creates essentially the curve over the rib and the hip. So just showing the inside here, confirming that there is no waist tape in this ribbon cincher. Most ribbon cinchers don't have a waist tape, although there are a couple of corset makers that do include them. And also this was a sample, but if you were commissioning a custom piece from Emerald Queen Art, you could probably request to have a waist tape put in if that's a priority to you. So this ribbon cincher does not really have binding per se, but on the vertical panels in the center front, the side seam, and the center back here, you can see that the ribbon was kept longer and it was folded under and stitched down. So this allowed Ursula to shape the center front and the center back to suit the angles of the other seams coming down here, and it obviously helps the bones to stay in place. And it also provides kind of like it folds over the lining, the coutil lining, so that those raw edges are covered at least. So there are a few areas where the binding is not like the most pristine, but I know from personal experience that it's very tricky to work with ribbon, especially going around curves. And this was a sample, so I got this heavily discounted, and it's not like this shows on the outside anyways. As long as it doesn't fray or anything, it stays in place. A Modesty panel did come with my corset. It is 4.5 inches wide, and it is boned and suspended on the laces. So you can see that there are horizontal bones here at the top, the middle, and the bottom, and there are also vertical bones on each side. And the Modesty panel itself is nicely curved at the top and the bottom because the corset itself is also curved at the top and the bottom. And it's kind of hard to see, but you can see that she laid down a single piece of vertical ribbon to match the rest of the corset. So if I had a 2-inch wide gap in the back of the corset, all you would see is this beautiful ribbon. And she also bound the Modesty panel in the same ribbon. She used the ribbon itself as the binding. And the knob side of the busk is recessed a little bit to give you a very narrow Modesty placket. So what she did was actually pretty clever. So obviously for the loop side of the busk, you need some kind of seam allowance to sew in between here. So you can see that there's normally the floral border on both sides of the ribbon. So she just folded that under. And she left this kind of accordion pleated middle piece as the part that's covering the actual bone part of the busk. And so she used a very narrow seam allowance on this side, kind of holding under half of that floral border and leaving maybe 1/4 of an inch of Modesty placket extending out from the knob side of the busk, which is perfectly sufficient for covering that gap in between the two sides. And that way both sides of the ribbon in the center front also look symmetric and balanced. And the busk in this corset is about 10 inches long, and it has 5 loops and pins, all equidistantly spaced. It is a standard flexible busk, so it is 1/2 inch wide on each side, and it's further reinforced by another flat steel bone on either side of the bust to add a little bit more rigidity to the front. It's easier to see the boning from the lining side of the corset because the lining is less decorative, and ribbon cinchers tend to be more lightly boned compared to other corsets, but surprisingly, this ribbon cincher has a total of 16 bones, 10 on each side, not including the busk and also not including the Modesty panel here. So again, like I said, in the center front there is a flat steel bone adjacent to the bust to add a little bit more rigidity here. On each side panel there are 4 bones, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this does attract my magnet here. And in the center back, there are also 3 steel bones. There's one there right at the edge, very skinny one, and 2 wider flat steels on either side of the grommets. And you can see that this attracts my magnet as well. Now the Modesty panel, even though it has 5 bones in here, these are acrylic bones, so they don't attract my magnet. But I don't mind having acrylic bones in my Modesty panel, and even I use like plastic and acrylic in my Modesty panels as well to stiffen them. Because if I want to remove the Modesty panel and wash it separately, because you know most of the sweating happens in my back, I don't have to worry about steel bones rusting or anything. And Modesty panels almost never have to go over any sort of aggressive curves or anything. I don't even have any like very pronounced lumbar lordosis. So I am never worried about the bones kinking or warping or going out of shape inappropriately, because I'm not putting like too much stress on it. Basically, the function of the bones is to prevent the panel itself from wrinkling, and that's it. Here is a close-up of the grommets. There are a total of 10 of them in this corset because it is a short cincher. They're equidistantly spaced, a little bit more than an inch apart, and you can see that they're all holding in fairly nicely. They're size 0 with a medium flange around them, finished in silver. And I've moved the Modesty panel aside so you can see the underside here. Nice big washers. They've all rolled really beautifully. No cracks in these, and they don't catch on the laces. There's no damage to the fabric around the grommet, and they are not pulling out. So they are definitely doing their job. And the laces in the back of this corset are very lovely. They are 5/8 of an inch wide, double-faced satin ribbon, so they're strong and shiny on both sides. You can see no stretch to them whatsoever. They lie really flat. They hold the knots and the bows very well. And it's a really lovely kind of ivory, or kind of like a buttercream color, a very slightly yellowish ivory that goes really nicely with the rest of this corset. I purchased this corset as a sample on Emerald Queen Art's Etsy store, so I paid $150 US for this corset, but she has many other corset samples in her shop. Usually 22 to 24 is the most popular size that she tends to make for these samples, and they range in price from $80 US up to about $160 US depending on the style. But she absolutely does take custom commissions. So if you want a specific waist size but with standard proportions, or if you want something completely custom fit, you want something bespoke, you can choose the style of the ribbons, or you can choose even a corset that's not a ribbon cincher. There is a lot of flexibility with custom, as you all know, as long as you have the budget for it. So if you go to her Etsy shop and you don't see any samples that particularly strike your fancy, you can feel free to send her a private message if you're interested in starting a commission. So this concludes my review of this ribbon cincher by Emerald Queen Art. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned something new. This video and this review was made possible only by my patrons on Patreon, so thank you so much. My patrons also get to vote on where I spend my money, whether it's new camera gear or putting things towards my paperback book or purchasing different corsets for review. So if you want to see me review a specific type of corset, or if you want to see me make a specific type of video, feel free to click the Patreon link on the screen here, and you can literally vote with your dollar. So thank you so much for watching once again, and if you own a corset by Emerald Queen Art, let us know in a comment what you think of it down below. Thank you so much again, and I will see you all next week for the next video. Bye.